he ended up dying penniless, in effect. And he had many ideas, many um, trains of research and themes of research that were going on when he died, and information and documentation of other research that he'd done in his life. He died at the age of 86, so he lived a long life. And these documents and this research material was seized when he died by the FBI. And there have been many suggestions and a lot of speculation about what was in them and what information the authorities therefore gleaned from these documents. But what can be said is that so much of the high-tech developments, not least in the um, realm of wireless communication, was actually first instigated, first perceived by Nikola Tesla. And to go beyond the concrete-like limitations of mainstream science, you have to think differently. In fact, you have to go beyond thinking, beyond thought. Thought is a very low level of intelligence and perception, very low. Oh, he's got a great mind. Oh, really, I am sorry. What we need is not even a great, but an open, expanded awareness, consciousness, which allows us to go beyond, if you like, five sense thought, to tap into the realms of infinite awareness, infinite knowledge, infinite inspiration, which is why great scientists like Tesla talked about the fact that they used not their mind so much for their great insight, but their intuition. Intuition doesn't come from the head. We don't go, oh, I've just had this intuitive. We go, I just know, I just know, I just know. This thinks, this knows. And so this is the inspiration point from which Tesla and others like him got so much of their inspiration. And you've only got to look at some of his quotes to see where he was and where he was coming from. Here's one. The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. Think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. That's absolutely right, because you can think how to create an atomic bomb. You can think deeply to do that, but it's insane to actually build it. But because we have a science, a materialistic science, overwhelmingly, that can, well, I'll tell you how I put it over the years. The difference between cleverness and wisdom. And wisdom also comes from the heart, from widened, expanded consciousness. It's clever, to take the same analogy, it's clever to be able to build an atomic bomb, but it's not wise to do so. And as I've said in my books over the years, cleverness without wisdom is the most destructive force on earth. And that is what we call modern science. Emphasis on the call. That's what it is. Overwhelmingly, again, it's like cleverness without wisdom. And therefore, it has become, look around. not least in terms of the environment. It has become, because of that, the most destructive force on Earth. So another Tesla quote. Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. I've been on about that for years and years and years and years and years. It's what I called in the last Wembley event. The law that says bollocks begets bollocks, because if your prime point of looking at everything is bollocks, then everything that comes from that foundation bollocks must be bollocks. And so we have a science that perceives, even though it's got quantum physics to show this is rubbish, bollocks, it still perceives from its foundation perceptions that the world is solid. It's not. The world is not solid. Explained all this many times in many places. And Tesla was realizing this. It's why he was able to go beyond where the other scientific limitations were. And so if you are looking at the world as if it's solid, then obviously the conclusions you come to from that basic flaw must be expressions of that flaw. And that's why science has been going round and round and round and round, while people that could see beyond that, like Tesla, were way ahead of him. Same with people like Leonardo da Vinci, even further back, even further ahead of their time. And the term conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theory was first widely employed by the CIA to try to discredit people pointing out the bloody obvious about the Kennedy assassination, that it was not what the official story claimed it was. And in fact, the official story was so ludicrous that it demanded unthinking, unquestioning, slavish innocence from the public in the ludicrous belief that authority would never lie to you, particularly over the death of a president. All that was necessary for the official story to be believed and to stand up. And so, in the face of trying to sell such a ridiculous theory, the idea was to just target those that were saying the obvious, that the official story was ridiculous. And so the term conspiracy theorist started to be widely used. And of course, since the Kennedy assassination, and particularly in more recent times, starting around the early 1990s and more to present day, evidence has been uncovered of endless hidden in the shadows conspiracies and manipulations to direct the world in particular ways. And so the old favourite, the old standby conspiracy theorists has been used as a weapon of propaganda to try to elicit by reflex action a dismissal of any evidence once the purveyor of that evidence is dubbed a conspiracy theorist. And this has gone on in the face of the most obvious evidence of conspiracies of many various kinds, which overwhelmingly, as I say, I would say are different expressions of the same one conspiracy. And so it was such a pleasure and so nice to read an article in the the Telegraph newspaper in Britain, or at least on their website, that's where I saw it, by a guy called Alex Proud. And it's a very balanced article, and hands up to him for that. And it's headed, "Perhaps the world's conspiracy theorists have been right all along." Hallelujah. Have they been right about everything? Of course not. Have they been right about most of it, and certainly the theme of what's going on? Absolutely. And it says, "We used to laugh at conspiracy theorists, but from FIFA to banking scandals and the Iraq war, it seems they might have been onto something after all." He says you'd have your mate who, after a few beers, would tell you that the moon landings were faked, or that the Illuminati controlled everything, or that the US government was holding alien autopsies in Area 51. And you'd be able to dismiss this because it was all rubbish, he says. He goes on, "It's true that there was always the big one, which wasn't quite so easily dismissed. This was the Kennedy assassination. But here you could be fairly sure that the whole thing was a terrible, impenetrable, murky morass. You knew that some things never would be known or would be released, partially redacted by the CIA 200 years in the future. And you knew that whatever the truth was, it was probably a bit dull compared with your mate's flights of fancy involving the KGB, the Mafia, and the military-industrial complex. Besides, it all made for a lot of very entertaining films and books. But," he says in the article, "this nice, cozy state of affairs lasted until the early 2000s. But then something changed. These days, conspiracy theories don't look so crazy, and conspiracy theorists don't look like crackpots. In fact, today's conspiracy theory is tomorrow's news headlines. If you read my books, for instance, from the last few years, in fact, the last nearly 25, you'll see that they did make tomorrow's headlines in terms of what happened subsequently in relation to what was said was planned in the books. And that's not because of genius or prophecy. It's because when you uncover what the plan is and what is planned to unfold, unless something comes along to intervene in that, then it will unfold. And in effect, you're predicting the future, but not from the ether, from knowing what the plan is to transform planet Earth into a Alcatraz for humans. It's tempting, he says, I suppose, to say we live in a golden age of conspiracy theories, although it's only really golden for the architects of the conspiracies. From the Iraq war to FIFA to the banking crisis, the truth is not only out there, but it's more outlandish than anything we could have made up. That's a great line, because one of the greatest defense mechanisms to the uncovering or the acceptance in people's minds of these conspiracies or that conspiracy is the chasm that has to be crossed between the world as people have been programmed from birth to perceive it and is constantly underpinned by the mainstream media, etc., and what's really going on. And so there is a great effort by people who know what they're doing, and lots of people who just don't know what they're doing but have bought the lie, to discredit those people who are uncovering and communicating what the mainstream media won't. So let's just look at the definition of a conspiracy, the dictionary definition. An agreement to perform together an illegal, wrongful or subversive act. Now, on that definition alone, this world is drowning in conspiracies. Another definition: an agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime or accomplish a legal purpose through illegal action. Once again, we're swimming. A joining or acting together as if by sinister design. A secret plan or agreement to carry out an illegal or harmful act, especially with political motivation, plot, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and the act of making such plans secret. So that is the definition or definitions of conspiracy. And you can see that it's not just that there are conspiracies by those definitions, but we are deluged with them at all levels of society. And you still get people saying, do you believe in the conspiracy theory of history, or do you believe in the cock-up theory? As if they're mutually exclusive, as if you have to pick one or the other. And of course, it's a mixture of both. Of course, people make cock-ups, bad decisions, and then things unfold. Of course that happens. But when you do the research, most people don't, you find that an enormous amount of what happens in the world is coldly calculated in the shadows to play out in the public arena as either random or unconnected. What we've seen since the United States began is an ongoing continuation of that British hypocrisy, which is now American hypocrisy. And what it means is that you claim to be something you are the opposite of, and that you try to justify invasions and attacks and sanctions on others for doing often a fraction of what you do as a matter of course. And there's a story I saw this week which kind of started this train of thought for this videocast. And the headline is, Ireland refuses to extradite man to US because prison system is too inhumane. Now this is a country, a government, an authority that goes on and on and on about human rights while deleting them at home by the week these days, and the same with the British end of this special relationship in hypocrisy. So the story goes on. Throughout the world, the US prison system is often seen as inhumane and excessively large. In fact, America incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. It's the land of freedom, isn't it? Yeah. That's just for public consumption, mate. The American prison system is so reviled, the story says, that Irish officials recently refused to extradite an alleged terrorist to the United States. The court cited concerns that if he was sent to the US, he would probably be placed in Colorado's Supermax prison, ADX Florence, an administrative maximum facility. The prison is nicknamed Colorado's Alcatraz of the Rockies, and lawyers arguing the case of this man said that putting him there would be worse than the death penalty. The story goes on. Irish High Court Justice Eileen Donnelly went as far as to write a 333-page report about why the suspect shouldn't be extradited. One highlight from the court's ruling was that incarceration at ADX Florence Prison would amount to cruel and unusual punishment. Donnelly said the prison amounts to a breach of the constitutional requirement to protect persons from inhuman and degrading treatment and to respect the dignity of the human being. Well, I doubt if the American government in all its forms, maybe the odd little exception here and there, in all its history, has respected the right and decency of human beings. And the same with Britain. Because they work on the principle of don't do what I do what I say. And while they pontificate about standing for democracy and human rights, they are destroying them like probably no other nations in certainly the Western world. And when you look at the war record of the United States anywhere in the world in relation to invasions of other countries and the regime change of people, they'd rather not be there. And it's quite amazing when you see the figures to back up what I've just said. Here's a headline. America has been at war 93% of the time. 222 out of 239 years since 1776. And what you're looking at, of course, is that Orwellian inversion, where war is peace and freedom is slavery and ignorance is strength. So you say you stand for peace and you want to bring peace and freedom to the world while you spend your time doing exactly the opposite. But of course, if you're going to war, if you're regime changing people you don't like and don't suit your agenda, if you're causing death and destruction in nation after nation, then to try to cover that, you have to keep repeating that actually, no, we want peace and we want freedom. And here's some addition to those figures. The US has only been at peace for 21 years total since it was created. Pick any year, it says, since 1776, and there is about a 91% chance that America was involved in some war during that calendar year. No American president, it says, truly qualifies as a peacetime president. Instead, all US presidents can technically be considered war presidents. Now, what this article then does, as you can see here, is it lists the wars that, and the years of the wars that America's been involved in since 1776. And it goes on and 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 on. So, what is happening now with attempts to create an excuse to invade Syria? the destruction of Libya, the use of ISIS to terrorize and cause mayhem in the Middle East and to justify the destruction of freedoms at home is actually just a continuation of this war philosophy that has been running through America since 1776. And later in the video cast, I'll get into why that is, because in the end, the driving force for America as a warlike invader of countries is not ultimately even coming from within America. The move more and more is to enforce this upon people and their children against their will. We've had cases where judges have decided that children will be given chemotherapy even though a parent doesn't want it, because they've taken the trouble to realize that chemotherapy is in effect state-sponsored murder. And so it's no surprise that what we're seeing coming out of America now, and this is a worldwide agenda, have no fear, that is coming out of America to enforce compulsory vaccinations. Now, what you have is different masks on the same system. So, Big Pharma, the pharmaceutical cartel that makes its billions and billions out of people being sick, and also out of giving us what they say we should take for being sick, or in case of vaccinations, to stop us being sick. This is the same Big Pharma whose version of healthcare is the biggest killer in the United States, with the same in many other countries as well. But if you take all the various aspects of mainstream medical treatment, doctors' mistakes, adverse drug, vaccine reactions, all these things put together that come under the heading of treatment, then the treatment is the biggest killer in the United States, above cancer, above heart disease, and so on. But big pharmaceutical, Big Pharma, is part of the system. It's a mask on the system. And doctors are merely an expression of that Big Pharma cartel. You try being a doctor and treating people outside of what Big Pharma deals with, which is basically the scalpel and the drug, and see what happens to you. And so because Big Pharma, therefore the medical profession, say the treatment for cancer is radiation or chemotherapy, then when a parent and a child are before a judge because the parent doesn't want the child to be poisoned by this weed killer stuff they call chemotherapy, then the judge, who's another mask on the system, listens to and acts upon what the other mask on the system, the medical profession, i.e. Big Pharma, say should be the treatment. And therefore, what you've got is different aspects of the system dictating to people what they will and will not have done to their own bodies. And I'm going to get into the vaccine thing big time because of what's coming out systematically at the moment. But let's just deep breath and have a look at that. What is left of personal sovereignty? What is left of personal choice when a system of authority is telling you what you will and will not have put into your own body, and how your body will be treated when it has a problem. If we are looking for a foundation starting point for the very foundation of freedom, then surely it starts with what we choose, a word that's disappearing down the memory hole fast, that we choose to have put into our own body, and what we choose in terms of having our body treated. Surely that's the foundation. Well, what this video cast is all about, and I'm going to expand on it as we go along, is that basic freedom is now under threat, under attack, like never before. And interestingly, a long time ago, somebody saw this coming. His name was Benjamin Rush. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence in the United States. And he warned in 1787 that medical freedom needed to be included in the American Constitution, because he said without this protection, the medical establishment would naturally progress, he said, as many of mankind's institutions do exactly, into an oppressive dictatorship. His words, echoing from 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago, ring strikingly true today, this article says. And this is what he said. The Constitution of this Republic should make special provision for medical freedom. To restrict the art of healing to one class will constitute the Bastille of medical science. All such laws are un-American and despotic. Unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship and force people who wish doctors and treatment of their own choice to submit to only what the dictating outfit offers. Now, as prophetic statements go, in the light of what's happening now, that takes some beating. Mahatma Gandhi had an opinion on vaccination too, and he said this: vaccination is a barbarous practice and one of the most fatal of all the delusions current in our time. Conscientious objectors to vaccination should stand alone, if need be, against the whole world in defense of their conviction. And if ever there was a time to start doing that, it's now, because of all that is unfolding, not least out of America, but it's happening worldwide. Mandatory vaccinations for adults and children for which they have no choice. That is the button being pressed. The button? The button. Depends on your accent, I suppose. That's the button being pressed now to bring in mandatory vaccinations, which is just another way of saying body fascism, or fascism in general. If you've not come across Wag the Dog, then when I tell you the plot, you'll realise what I mean. Wag the Dog starred Dustin Hoffman as a big Hollywood producer and Robert De Niro as the ultimate White House government spinner. And the basic plot was this. They were coming up to an election, and the president had got caught with, it would seem, an underage girl. And so they needed to get that story off the front pages and out of public consciousness. So what they did was decide they were going to start a war against Albania, a war in Albania. And they decided on Albania because they reckoned that very, very few Americans would know where Albania was. And, you do see this phenomenon among quite a lot of Americans, certainly not all, but you can see on the internet where a television crew have gone around asking people with a map of the world where various countries are. And I remember one where the crew had actually put North Korea over Australia. And the person's there, he said, "Oh, how do you know it was there? Oh, that's interesting." Well, no, it's not there, it's Australia. But this is a really important area, because if we don't get informed even about where countries are, never mind the geopolitical, cultural background, then what's left but just to accept the lies about these countries and these situations from government? Anyway, they decided they were going to hire Dustin Hoffman, the big Hollywood producer, to produce all this, because they weren't actually going to have a war in Albania. They were going to have a war in a studio. And what they were going to do was produce footage which they were then going to give to the networks and the media to then replay to the public as if it was all true. Now, you've only got to look at what's happening today with all these ISIS videos just being regurgitated by the media on the basis that they're true and they reflect what's happening without any serious questioning. I mean, where do these videos come from? These, again, Hollywood kind of type videos, very highly sophisticated, well-made videos. Where do they actually come from? Who's actually behind them? These are the questions we have to ask. Because what happened in Wag the Dog is that they sent this footage to the media, who played it out. The public believed it. And now America's at war with Albania, and it's all in a studio. And there's some interesting dialogue in the film, which kind of is seriously relevant to what's happening today. The Robert De Niro character, was called Breen, the spinner, he said this: "We remember the slogans, we can't even remember the wars. You know why? That's show business. And that, to a very large extent, is what it is. That's why we're here," he said. "Naked girl covered in napalm, V for victory, 5 Marines raising the flag, Mount Suribachi. You remember the picture 50 years from now, but you'll have forgotten the war. The Gulf War, smart bomb falling down a chimney, 2,500 missions a day, 100 days. One video of one bomb," he said, Mr. Motz, the Hoffman character. "The American people bought that war. War is show business. That's why we're here." And there was another quote from Breen, the spinner, who said, "You watch the Gulf War. What do you see day after day? The one smart bomb falling down the chimney. The truth? I was in the building when we shot that shot. We shot it in a studio at Falls Church, Virginia, 1/10 scale model of a building." And the Hoffman character says, "Is that true?" And the reply was, "How the fuck do we know?" You take my point. And the point is, how do we know? We're only just being told that that's what it is. And there's nothing more powerful, I've mentioned this before, there's nothing more powerful in manipulating perception than to show people some pictures and have a voiceover telling them what the pictures mean. If you watch pictures without voiceover, you can see things that you can't see if the voiceover is telling you what you're looking at. Very powerful. In Wag the Dog, um, not only did they make the war in a studio, they had a Willie Nelson character played by Willie Nelson. He made a war song. They had a what they call photogenic orphan to focus on, focus emotion on. I mean, just look at the wars that have been perpetuated around the world and see this recurring themes that Wag the Dog so brilliantly exposed. And then when it started to die down a bit and the media started to look back at the president and this scandal, and the war appeared to be ending, then they came up with this thing about this guy called Schumann. And Schumann was the story of a guy left behind in Albania. And they had this catch line, discarded like an old shoe. And so they then set up this rescue of Schumann. Am I describing things that have happened in not too distant past? They set up this rescue of Schumann, but Schumann turns out to be the guy they picked turns out to be a right, crazy. And anyway, the plane crashed, and the survivors were helped by a farmer. But this Schumann guy tries to rape the farmer's daughter, and the farmer kills him. So now they've got this hero Schumann being rescued from like behind enemy lines, but he's dead because the farmer killed him. And so what do? They then spin a story to the public that poor old Schumann has died of injuries sustained during the rescue. And they give him this big military funeral. And what happened in the film? The president was re-elected. And when the Hoffman character says, look, I'm not having this, I want some credit for this amazing thing that I've done, he died of a heart attack. And that's why I say Wag the Dog is being remade night after night on the television news, called War Against ISIS and Russia is a Threat to the World. Physicality, the so-called solid world, is an illusion, and that basically it's holographic, illusory, physical. Of course, some people have looked at the evidence presented and seen that it stands up. Most other people have gone, Ike's a nutter, in the usual reflex action programmed nonsense. So I was interested this week to see a report in the mainstream media which was quoting scientists who work in the realm of quantum physics as saying that we only see this world that we think is so real when we're looking at it. And this is the report. The headline is, "Your entire life is an illusion. New test backs up theory that the world doesn't exist until we look at it." I've heard that somewhere before. Quantum mechanics states reality doesn't exist until it's measured, this report says. Actually, I'd use another word instead of measured. I'd say decoded or projected. Quantum mechanics states reality doesn't exist until it's measured, but I would say until it's decoded, in the same way that this computer behind me decodes information in a non, if you like, visual state. It's not pictures and words and graphics. It's just codes and information, which the computer then decodes into all that stuff on the screen, which only exists where? On the screen. So the report goes on. Experiments using an atom and laser beams has proven it to be true. The fact that we only create the world that we see when we look at it. So the report goes on. The universe doesn't exist if we stop looking at it. It does, but not in this form. This is according to a theory in quantum mechanics which argues that a particle's past behavior changes based on what we see. Now, as there is no past behavior, there is no past, there's no future. These are just perceptions from the only, if you like, time, no time that exists, called the now. From the now, this now moment, the only moment that exists, we perceive the past and we perceive the future. We only experience the future in the now, because it's the only place you can do anything. So now scientists have performed a new experiment proving this theory to be true on the scale of atoms. According to the rules of quantum mechanics, the boundary between the world out there and our own subjective consciousness are blurred. Well, they're not blurred. They're not blurred because one, the out there, and the, if you like, in there, are expressions of each other. So what they call blurred is just a point where one becomes the other, where it starts to, they start to measure the reality out there as opposed to the reality in here. That seems to be a blurred area, but it's not. It's just where one expression of the same thing manifests as another expression of the same thing. And it goes on, but quantum physics predicts that whether you observe wave-like behavior or particle behavior depends only on how it actually is measured at the end of the journey. I would, again, replace measured for decoded or projected. It proves that measurement is everything. Decoding is everything. At the quantum level, reality does not exist if you are not looking at it, said Associate Professor Andrew Truscott. Reality does not exist if you're not decoding it. That's what I suggest is the real situation that we're facing here. So, this news story was basically thrown away. Just little thing. You know, the front pages are dominated by politics or celebrity or scandal. Things like this, looking at the very nature of the reality that we're experiencing, are like down there, if they get in at all. And that says so much about the world. Because this whole area, this whole arena of the nature of reality and how it is created, how it is manifested, and therefore how we can play with it and change it, is surely the most fundamental of all fundamentals, because from that everything comes. But how rarely it's talked about. How rarely it's even considered, not least in the mainstream media. When I started out on this journey a quarter of a century ago, one of the things that I was asking was, why is all this about the nature of reality? Why is it not taught in the schools? Why is it not in the media? It's so fundamental to life and how we live it and how we perceive it. And 25 years later, in fact, long before 25 years later, it became very clear that we don't see this at the forefront of the media, the forefront of education, the very basics of reality and how we create it. Because those in the shadows that are driving the direction of human society don't want us to know. Because if we realized that this world is an illusion and that we have the power to impact and decide what kind of illusion we experience, then everything changes. Instead of the power being out there as it's perceived, oh, those people in power, what they're doing now, it comes here, comes to us as we dictate our reality by imprinting our desired reality upon the illusory experience that we call daily life. So when you think about politics, politics is founded, and the laws that are passed and the decisions that are made are all founded on the idea that this world is solid, that this world is, if you like, real in the sense and way that we experience it. And thus, as I said in the perception deception, if your fundamental perception, your fundamental premise from which you're coming from, in terms of politics, in terms of science, in terms of education, in terms of medicine, is fundamentally flawed, then everything that comes from that, the laws you pass, the way you treat illness, the way you promote science, must all be fundamentally, again that word, fundamentally, the very basis of everything, flawed. And as I say in the perception deception, there is a simple law. Bollocks begets bollocks. And if your foundation, perception of everything from which you're coming from is bollocks, then everything that comes from that must be bollocks. I've just described why the world is as it is. You know, when you look at this over a longer period, what we're seeing with the Cameron governments as they are now is a progression. You know, it's presented to us as if we had Margaret Thatcher during the 1980s, and then after John Major we had the years of Tony Blair, and he came in and did his thing, and then there was a bit of Gordon Brown after him, the same Labour Party as Blair, and then came the Cameron years, which are now unfortunately ongoing. But you can see it as individual, different people representing different parties doing their thing, and then someone else comes in and does their thing. You can see it like that, but I suggest it would be misleading to do so. What we're seeing is, no matter which party is in power, same in America with the Democrats and the Republicans, same here with the Conservatives and the Labour Party. It doesn't matter who's in power, the same unfolding agenda, well, unfolds. So you look at the common themes of this progression. It's a greater and greater disparity between the richest in society, the tiny, tiny mega rich, and the, you know, even less than mega rich, and the poorest. That has gone on being progressed through all this period of this party coming in, that party coming in, and all that. And then you look at the big brother state with more and more controls, more and more surveillance, more and more surveillance of the most private data. And the same again in the United States and around the world. And so it's not really a Cameron government or a Blair government or a Thatcher government. These are masks on the same unfolding face that's in power, whoever is officially in the White House or in Downing Street. And so when people talk about vote for this party or vote for that party, what they're saying is vote for the same hidden hand that's behind all of them. And so just with Blair, or as with Blair, when he replaced the Conservative period dominated by Margaret Thatcher, nothing changed of fundamentals. Just went on. They called it a different name. More and more Big Brother, more and more disparity, like I say, between rich and poor. And you can get caught up in the political system, like myopia and elections. But if you take a step back, you could see this common theme. And the common theme is that we are incessantly moving, no matter who's in political power officially, towards this, what I call Hunger Games society, where the tiny, tiny few, the less than 1%, are owning the wealth of the world. I mean, we're nearly up to 1% owning nearly 50% of the wealth now, and that's not where it's supposed to end. And the rest, including those that think they're comfortable now and probably voted for Cameron, as a mass of poverty-stricken slaves of that less than 1%. And the status quo, that structure of the few, the very few, dictating to the very many, is designed to be imposed through a strata between them, which is known as the police state. When you look at the way that police forces around the world are more and more mirroring the military, not only in the way that they dress and the way that they're armed, but also in the way that they act. And so we are seeing this Hunger Games society unfolding before our eyes, with the police state and the systematic recruiting of psychopaths in uniform to carry out brutally and in total disregard for what we call law, decency, justice, fairness, carrying out the will of the few to impose their will upon the many. And at the same time, like I say, this massive gap goes on growing between the richest and the poorest. So we should be very careful about looking at political parties, however unpleasant they are, like Cameron's Conservative Party, and say, you know, it's them, and if only they got in, would have been different. Well, that's not the experience of ongoing political history, is it? I mean, in the United States, you had the extremes of Boy George Bush, and he was replaced by someone who, just think and remember the first Obama election campaign. It was all about, I stand for change, I'm different to everyone else, I'll close Guantanamo Bay within a year. And you could not, in terms of presentation, have anyone apparently more different than Obama was to Boy George Bush. What has happened in the Obama years? It's been a continuation of the agenda that was followed by Bush. And go back further, just like I mentioned with Thatcher and Blair, etc. Go back further. Pick up at the time Thatcher came into power, which was 1979. 1980, into power came Ronald Reagan and Father George Bush in the United States. What that really was not President Reagan and Vice President Father Bush, but President Father Bush and Vice President, he's going for a sleep, Ronald Reagan, in truth, in where the power was and where the decision making came from. And then you go from Reagan Bush to Father Bush as his period as official president, after 2 as unofficial president. You go through the Clinton years, then you go through the Boy Bush years, you go through the Obama years. And what we're being offered now, and Americans being offered now, is a choice, it would seem, between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. So you can become president of the United States so long as your name is Bush or Clinton, except with the odd exception in recent decades. And you look at the progression, just with Thatcher through Blair to Cameron, you look at the progression from Reagan Bush through to Obama. And what have you got? The same unfolding agenda of the gap between rich and poor getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the surveillance big brother state coming in more and more extremes, greater and greater extremes. This is not a coincidence. It's a plan that I've been exposing in my books for all these years. I've debated a few times at the Oxford Union, the ancient debating society at Oxford University. And when I first went, I was kind of shocked to realise that students who took part in the debate, and many of whom, this is why I'm mentioning it, go on to be politicians, that they were kind of drawing lots to decide if they were going to speak for the motion that night, for the proposal, or against it. And I had someone on my side who vehemently debated and passionately supported, it seemed, the motion that we were supporting. And afterwards I realised he didn't support it at all. He was just debating. It was his debating skills. And anyone who didn't know, who watched that performance, would have said, this guy passionately believes what he's saying. And that is how politics works. That's why I talk about actors. Some of them are very good actors, and some are actually appalling, like David Cameron and Tony Blair. Ironically, Blair was called the great actor-politician, that he could put on a performance. I don't think I've ever seen a politician that you could see through so clearly than him. If anyone wants an example, and by the way, if you're going to do this, I strongly recommend you have a sick bag available. You probably need it. Go on to YouTube and find Tony Blair's spontaneous speech, I love it, about the death of Princess Diana. And, well, like I say no more. You'll need a sick bag. It was an appalling piece of acting. But this is what these people are. They're actors. Which brings me back to Cameron. The reason that he has announced there will be a referendum to give the British people the opportunity to vote whether to stay in the European Union, fascist, bureaucratic, centralised state, or leave, 2017 is when it's supposed to happen, is because he was under pressure from both many people on his own side and the rise, certainly the rise at the time, of UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which is, of course, based on coming out of the European Union. And so he had a problem, and he wanted to clip the wings of UKIP by saying, yeah, I'm against all what's happening in the European Union as well. Yeah, there's too much bureaucracy, too much centralised control. And so we'll have a referendum and I'll put serious demands in if we don't get them and all that rubbish. There's no way he wants to come out of the European Union. And what has happened is that this week he has finally announced what his demands are. I said at the time that he announced it that what would happen is that he would put forward weak, mild demands to the European Union for reform. They would go, oh no, we can't deal with this. Oh yeah, tough negotiations, tough negotiations. The mild changes will be negotiated to become even milder, and then he'll come out before the referendum and say, I've negotiated serious reforms in the European Union. I recommend we stay in. And that process is unfolding before our eyes. And it didn't take a genius to predict it, because anyone that looks at the story and knows the story knows that this is what's going on. The reason that there's no way he wants to come out is because he is a front man, like all these here today, gone tomorrow politicians. Some are knowing front men, others are puppet front men. Well, they're all puppets in the end, but some know they're puppets and some don't. Cameron's a puppet who knows. And the reason that they don't want to come out of the European Union is because that which is controlling them, that which has brought them to power, that which tells them what to do from the shadows, has the European Union as part of a massive global structure of centralized Orwellian fascist control. And this structure, which I've been writing about for more than 2 decades, well over 2 decades now, and it's coming to light and coming to pass all the time, is for there to be a world government which would dictate to everyone on the planet. That world government would control a world central bank, a world single currency that would just be electronic, not cash. This is why we're hurtling towards the cashless society. Oh, look, I can pay my bill on the phone, isn't it great? Yeah, I guess tyranny and slavery is great if you look at it like that. Anyway, single currency, electronic, not cash, world central bank, world army to impose the will of the world government. And that's what NATO is becoming. And I predicted that years ago, way back into the 90s. I said in my books, watch for NATO operating outside of its designated area of the North Atlantic region. And that is what has happened. It's now in the Middle East. It's all over the bloody place. And what we're seeing with NATO and the international community, the G20, the G8, G7, whatever number they pick this year, they are proxy world government, world armies in terms of NATO. And of course, when you look at the next level, under that structure of world government and all that, then you have the superstate regions that ultimately, eventually answer to the world government. And the European Union, of course, is the most obvious and the most advanced. But they want them in the Americas, they want them in the Australia, Far East area, they want them in the Middle East, they've got one in Africa with the African Union. And these are being largely created in the same way. They say, here's a free trade zone, it's good for jobs, good for the economy, and then they just, step by step, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, they move towards more and more centralized control. Now, in terms of the European Union, here's a quote from a man called Jean Monnet, Frenchman, you won't be surprised to know, who is still known as the father of Europe, the father of the European project. And this is what he wrote to a friend on April 30th, 1952, day after I was born, 63 years ago. This is what he wrote. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation. So that is the game. That has been the game all along. And no one is going to get in the way unless the British people actually get some backbone, stand up and see the light of what's going on. There's no way that Cameron is going to oversee Britain coming out of the European Union when it is such a long-term plan to be part of this whole global structure of fascist control. And here's another thing. Within the European Union, there are planned to be no countries, no sovereign nations. The idea is to break up countries into regions, weak regions, each specializing in different contributions to the European centralized fascist state. Now, they then have the problem in Europe of massive resistance to that, because there is a sense of nationhood among vast numbers of people. They have an identity with their country, with their nation, with the history of that country and that nation, and the last thing they would want is for that country to disappear. So what they're doing is systematically breaking down that sense of nationhood, that sense of unique culture, that sense of national identity. And they're doing it by systematically opening the door to fantastic amounts of immigration. Now, some of that immigration is absolutely justified because you have people made refugees from wars caused by these same people as part of this bigger plan as well. But the door's not just being opened to refugees who deserve our help and deserve our support. They're being opened to as many people as possible. Why? Because they want to pour in other cultures to break down the sense of European national culture. I'm not saying that's right or whether it's wrong in terms of identifying with a culture. I'm saying that's how it is. And that's what they have to deal with. And this is how they're dealing with it. And the reason that Germany has been targeted so massively with such unquestioning support by Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is because Germany has such a national identity, such a sense of nationhood, that this has to get maximum treatment to break it down. And so you have a village of 102 people in Germany having, 700 odd migrants put in its midst. Of course, very soon that village is no longer German. Now that's not saying, no, it's nothing to do with racism. It's to do with bloody fact. And that fact is connected to this whole agenda of breaking down a sense of nationhood so it can be, countries can be absorbed with the least resistance possible into this structure that's long been planned, that I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking about now, it's been in my books for 20 odd years. And the reason Chancellor Merkel, you'd think she'd be resisting it as Chancellor of Germany, saying, oh no, German culture, what's going on? The reason is that she's supporting it and unquestioningly supporting it. Because Angela Merkel is an absolute asset of this hidden cabal that's driving this. She has no allegiance to Germany. First and foremost, it's to her masters in the shadows, and same with Cameron. And that is why there's no way in the world that he would even consider having Britain leave the European Union. Then there's been stories that don't seem to be connected to that. Like there's been a big protest in the area around the British Parliament against austerity and other expressions of British government policy. And we've had the commemoration of the big anniversary of the First World War with nearly 900,000 ceramic poppies produced and put together around the Tower of London. Now, what I'm going to do today is talk about all those things, but connect them up because they are very related if you go deep enough. And let's start with the American election. It still amazes me, given all the evidence of history and not least recent and modern times, that people still think that changing a party to run a government is actually going to change anything. Here's an article on the midterm elections in a British newspaper, Daily Mail. Obama humbled as US voters rise up against their arrogant elite. Crushing defeat for Democrats mirrors discontent in Britain. Well, this is how it goes. We have a essentially two-party state. Most places have a two-party state in terms of anyone that can get into government, unless there's a coalition involved, as we have in Britain at the moment with the Liberal Democrats. So 2-3 parties, usually two, have any chance of forming a government. So given that to have any chance of getting into government, you have to be in one of the major parties who have the financial resources and the access to the media to get their people elected. It means this, that you vote for Party A in the American sense in the last few years, that's the Democrats of Obama. And then you don't like him very much because he's basically just like all the rest, despite the fact that he got elected initially in 2008 by saying that more than any other politician in history that he stood for change. But he didn't. The reason they use this thing about change in elections is because of the way countries are run on behalf of an elite and not the people in general. It means that at any point in time, vast numbers of people are not happy with the status quo. So what these people come along and do is manipulate that and exploit that by saying, I stand for change, I'll bring about change. And people who don't like the status quo, which is vast numbers of people for the reasons I've explained, will go, yeah, oh, well, yeah, vote for you, yeah, change, that's what we need, change. And then what happens is, there's no change. There you go, that's the scam. Because what elections are about are not telling the public what they're going to do. They're telling the public what they need to tell the public, so the public in enough numbers will vote for them. And when you're voting electronically, as they do in America, maybe even that's not necessary anymore, but that they'll vote in enough numbers to put them into power. And when they put them into power, they then do what they were going to do anyway, which is invariably nothing like they said they would do. In Obama's case, these things have been blatant. So we have seamlessly gone from the extremes of Boy George Bush, the right, into a mirror, basically, of Bush, and that's the left of the Democrats. And when people in America who've sussed this call them the Republicrats, they are absolutely spot on. So this is an article written by a guy called Gavin Esler. He's a BBC presenter. And he says that the era of hope is over. Now, the era of hope never began because it was all a scam. It was all just window dressing to get the guy elected on this wave of optimism. And so that whole hope thing, I mean, what is hope? Hope is like sitting on a carousel horse, going round and round and round, hoping that you'll catch the one in front. Because hope is never now. Hope is a forward projection. And as long as we can be sold hope instead of change now, instead of decency now, then we'll go on taking this scam and saying, well, at least we hope it's going to get better now. It's not designed to get better. That's the idea. It's designed to go down the same unchanging agenda, no matter who's in power. And I'll explain how that's done as we go along in this video cast today. Esler goes on about how the election results for Obama were worse than the most pessimistic forecasts of his party's strategists, amounting to a comprehensive rejection of his governance. Well, like I say, when you are stuck with basically two parties, in America, absolutely two parties, then when you don't like one, the only alternative you've got to replacing them is the other. And here's the question. What if both of them, as they are, were controlled by the same force, the same network, the same cabal? You're just voting for masks on the same one face, masquerading as differences. And more people are beginning to see this, that no matter who you vote for, as they used to say when I was in America years ago, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. Actually, the secret government that people never see. And so when, people say, as I've been saying now for decades, what's the point in voting? You're just giving credence to a rigged system and credibility to a rigged system. People say, oh, you can't not vote. People fought for the vote. No, they didn't. They fought and campaigned for a vote that made a difference. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about votes that make no difference because the whole system is rigged. And thus, the only way at an election, at the point of the ballot, that we can make a statement, this system's rigged, we're having nothing to do with it until it's not rigged, is not to vote. Because in doing so, you are giving your energy and giving credibility to a completely rigged system. There's a point in that? I don't see it. A so-called expert on the heavens and astronomy called Brian Cox, and he pointed out something that pointed out in my books, that the solar eclipse happens because the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, and it's 400 times nearer to the Earth. And so that combination means that at the time of a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, the moon looks the same size as the sun from the Earth. And he said that, and then followed it by saying, but that's a complete coincidence. Well, it ain't. And I've gone into this, among much else, in the perception deception. the idea that that is a coincidence just betrays a total misunderstanding, I would suggest, and certainly an imprisonment of possibility that mainstream science is infested with. And mainstream science will never answer the great questions of life because it's looking in the wrong place. Indeed, it won't look in many places because it's outside of its field of official song sheet. And the other thing that I noticed when people were talking about their experience of the eclipse today is that they felt weird, they said. It was a strange feeling. It was a strange atmosphere. And what is atmosphere? Atmosphere is energy. So when you're at a football match or a soccer match and there's a big excited crowd, people feel like the hair's standing on the back of their neck, and they feel this this energy. And what is that? That's an electromagnetic field generated by the excitement or the emotion of the crowd. So everything is energy, and everything is affected by energy, and energy is affected by everything. So if something really, really bad, really unpleasant happens in a house, for instance, you feel this when you go in some of these old mansions and old churches and old castles, maybe. You go in and you go, oh dear, I don't like this. Ooh, it's eerie. What is eerie? It's atmosphere. What is atmosphere? It's the impregnation on that energy of the nature of the experience that has happened there. And you get other people, they'll go into a room and think, oh, this place feels so joyous, so happy. And that's just another situation that impregnated itself upon that energy field, which then people feel. So when you are coming from that perspective and you look at Hollywood, it is the manipulation of global perception, and it uses very deep esoteric or satanic, more like, techniques and rituals to manipulate energy, to manipulate perception, and to manipulate the viewers of the movies. And you know, I've been all over the world, and Hollywood movies are everywhere. They are one of the great ways that people's perceptions of everything, historical events, whatever, can be manipulated to believe a fairy story instead of looking at what actually happened. And the reason I'm saying all this is I watched a DVD this week, which I think has just come out, of a movie film that's called Starry Eyes. And it is the story of an actress getting caught up in the satanic cult that is Hollywood. And it's not just Hollywood. It's the mainstream, the mega mainstream entertainment industry in general. Because people don't become superstars by accident. Yes, sometimes it's pure talent, but rarely. It's what is behind you. I mean, I've seen so many talented people get absolutely nowhere because they're not what the system wants, not what the system requires. And this movie, Starry Eyes, was about the way they chose people and why they chose people and what they were then going to use them for. And you look at the very name, Hollywood. Hollywood. The holly was the sacred wood of the Druids in Celtic times, and Harry Potter, in the massively esoteric, impregnated Harry Potter books and films, had a holly wand. And the the whole thing about holly can be seen in so many different places. For instance, our Christmas, of course, is associated with holly, but it comes from Saturnalia, which was the Roman festival up into the same period, midwinter, around what we call Christmas. Saturnalia was the festival of worship to the god of the Romans, Saturn. And holly, esoterically, is associated with Saturn. And if anyone's, of course, read my books in recent years, they'll see the massive importance that I place upon Saturn and why, in terms of Satanism, Saturnism, and how it relates to all these rituals and how it relates to the network that manipulates and directs life on Earth currently. And so when we look at the Christmas festival, we're looking at Saturnalia. What they used to do in Rome at that time is they had holly as part of the ritual. They exchanged gifts, they decorated trees. Our Christmas is just the worship of Saturn. And I don't think it's a coincidence at all that Santa is an anagram of Satan, because Satan, Saturn, these are interchangeable terms when you get into the levels of ritual that go on all around the world and go on massively in Hollywood, holy wood, the holy wood of the Druids. And over the years, I've met many people in California and the Hollywood, Los Angeles area, who've told me stories of taking part or being aware of the satanic ritual network in Hollywood and Los Angeles. And again, they say they use Celtic Druidic ritual as well as Babylonian ritual. Not just in the sense of inverted from what it should be and what the world would be nicer for if it was the other way around, but inverted in the sense that almost everything you look at in human society is on its head. And I had a couple of stories on the website this week, which, if you put them together and put it together with lots of other stuff I'm going to talk about, then the fact that the world is not only inverted, but systematically inverted through cold calculation for reasons of human control becomes perfectly bloody obvious. One of them was about sunglasses. Sunglasses? What's that got to do with it? Well, actually quite a lot, because it is a gateway into a lot of inversion. It was being pointed out in one of the stories that wearing sunglasses in anything like, regular use is not good for health. Why? Because we are receiving information, energy from the sun all the time. And one way that we use that information, and it's vital to not just what we call physical function, what I would call holographic function, but actually mental and emotional function as well. And it's the way that the pineal gland in the brain receives this information from the sun in the form of what we call light, and then transforms it into different electrochemical forms, which is then communicated through the body and is fundamental. You cannot stress enough, fundamental to human health. So people who wear sunglasses all the time, whenever the sun comes out, are denying the pineal gland that source of information, because the pineal gland thinks, well, it's nighttime, there's no light. And so it acts and functions as if that's the case. And this takes me through to something else about inversion. And that is the way we are told, in effect now, to fear the sun and to fear cholesterol. And these are two classic inversions, as I will explain. First of all, we need the sun for enough vitamin D. And without vitamin D, we get a big list of health effects, not just health effects, but mental effects. Let me just give you an idea of what happens if we are deficient in vitamin D. This comes from the Vitamin D Council, headed by a man called Dr. Jacob Cannell, MD, and he's listing here the consequences of insufficient vitamin D. Autoimmune diseases, cancer, chronic pain, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, mental illness, including things like Alzheimer's, are affected by lack of vitamin D. Multiple sclerosis, muscle weakness and coordination, obesity, osteoarthritis. Vitamin D is also vital to brain function. It's vital to bone health. And according to various mainstream medical surveys, having low vitamin D gives you a 35% higher chance of heart disease, a 14% greater chance of cancer, and 2/3 of the population, it is said, are not getting enough vitamin D. Just to give you an idea about multiple sclerosis, the highest figures in America are in the north, where there's less sun, and the lowest figures are in the south, where of course there's lots of sun. Why? Vitamin D. Now this brings me to cholesterol inversion. What we're told now is, like the sun, that cholesterol is bad for us. Got to lower your cholesterol. Ooh, if you don't. And now what they're doing is they're selling this extraordinary garbage, this extraordinary scam called statins to lower cholesterol, good for health. Well, it absolutely is not. Why? Because cholesterol just happens to be absolutely crucial in converting sunlight into vitamin D. So when you have very low cholesterol, or cholesterol lower than it should be, from the body's point of view, not Stone Age medicine, then you're not converting sunlight into vitamin D, and that's a whole, well, just listed them, of potential health and mental health effects of that. So it's all kind of an inversion. Everything's an inversion. So sun's, oh, bad for you. No, it's not. Cholesterol, bad for you. No, it's not. Not in the way they say, anyway. And it's essential, cholesterol. Never mind bad for you. And then they say, oh, but the sun gives you sun cancer. Well, you know one of the effects of sunlight through sunglasses, etc., not reaching the pineal gland in the quantity necessary, is it stops the production of substances in the skin which protect you from the sun. And there's another thing. Oh, no, the sun's dangerous. You got to put sunblock all over you. What does sunblock contain? chemicals. And you think that the explosion in the use of sunblock and sun chemicals in terms of protecting the body, the skin from the sun, as they're said, do you think the skin coming into contact with that deluge, often during the summer, of chemical cocktail will be good for its health? And what we're going to find, and it's inevitable as well, the sun coming up, is that a great deal of skin cancer is actually being caused by A, the chemicals in the sunblock, inversion, and the fact that the lack of information being decoded from the sun by the pineal gland is lowering the sun's, the skin's natural defenses to the negative side of too much sun. And so wherever you look, you see inversion. My great friend Mike Lambert at the Shen Clinic, just down the road from here on the Isle of Wight, who is a genius healer of decades of experience. He's been telling me for years and years and years and years and years, fat is not bad for you. It is absolutely necessary. At the same time, we've had the fear the sun version of fat, haven't we? Oh, you mustn't eat fat, it's bad for you, it'll give you heart trouble and all that. And as Mike has been pointing out all these years, fat doesn't make you fat. Carbohydrates make you fat. Carbohydrates start to change blood sugar levels, so there's this explosion of diabetes. Why? Because carbohydrates turn to a sugar called glucose in the body, and then the body has to deal with that tidal wave of sugar. Oh, I'm just having a bit of bread, mate, and a bit of pasta. It's not sugar. Yes, it is when it gets in the body, darling. And so now, after all these years of Mike telling me this, now mainstream doctors and studies are coming out and saying, oh, we told you fat was bad for you, but actually it's not. Bloody hell. Since I've been taking not, a break from work, but just taking it easier since I was ill over the last few weeks, coming out of it now, it gives you another perspective on what we call life. I've been writing about these subjects that I'm going to talk about for a long time, but the last few weeks has kind of brought it into greater focus. And I guess you could sum it up with a question: what's it all about? And another one: what are we doing? Because what, for most people, the vast majority, we call life, it's not life at all in the widest sense. It's a conveyor belt. It's a software program that we go through when we press start. That's what we call birth. And when we shut the computer down, that's what we call death. And what happens in the middle, for most people, like I say, the vast majority, is not life, but a program, a sequence, a recurring sequence, which almost everyone around you is also going through which gives the illusion that it's normal. It ain't normal. I remember an advertisement on British television some years ago. It obviously wasn't a great advertisement because I can't remember what it was for, but it was a brilliant concept. And what happened is this baby is born, comes out of the womb, and then flies through the air like a missile at great speed. And as it is going through the sequence, it ages faster and faster and faster until it becomes an old person, and then whoosh, smacks into the ground, and the ground covers it up in the grave. And that really struck me when I saw it, because I thought, okay, it might be going a bit faster, but that's what happens. And it's because we are going through programming from the moment we're born, actually probably before we're born in the womb. We're picking it up. And what happens is, first of all, your parents that have been through the sequence that I'm going to describe, they are passing on the same sequence as if it's not only normal, but the right thing to do, almost the only thing to do. And this sequence goes like this. You're born, then you have a very, very short, increasingly short period of relative freedom. Relative freedom. In this world, freedom is always relative. And that maybe lasts 3 years, if you're lucky. And then into the 4th year, maybe even before that, with preschool, you're into school. And suddenly, just that long after you've entered this world, there's an authority figure standing up in front of you, telling you what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's credible and not credible, and even down to when you can and cannot go to the toilet. And that already has triggered this lifelong programming of an authority figure, or figures, in the end an authority system, dictating our lives. But to do it without much resistance, it has to persuade us that this program is to be pursued, is to be seen as credible, is to be seen as the only way. And I've sat around a table just before I spoke at the Oxford Union a few years ago with some young students who at that teenage point in their life already could not perceive of any world that didn't involve this process and didn't involve a top-down structure of hierarchical power. Talking of power, that's the power of the program to distort and download the perception of reality into the vast majority of people, certainly in the Western world, in the very first early years of their lives in this reality. So, you go to school, and it starts. And then you go to a bigger school, and then a bigger school. And the idea is that you constantly confirm to the system that you're taking on its version of reality by telling it what it wants to hear in something called exams. Examinations become the criteria, the point of judgment on whether you are intelligent or stupid or compliant or free thinking. And the more that you pass the exams as you progress through this system, the more you are considered to be intelligent. And when you do look at the education system and the exam passing system, what becomes very clear is it is absolutely no test or qualification for intelligence. Some of the most stupid people I've ever met in my life have been up to their necks in educational qualifications. Academia is full of people of extraordinarily limited perception of everything. All they know, or what they think they know, is what the system has told them to know. And so you go through this system and onto university. More and more people go into university. Why? Because universities make a fortune. The more people they can get in there, the better for them financially. And so they lower the qualifications and what have you, so that they can get more people in and they get more money and they can program more people for longer. And then you go out into the world of work. Now, all the time you hear this phrase that the education system must prepare students for the world of work. And what that means is it must prepare them to become cogs in a machine, to be used while they are healthy and have the energy to serve the machine. And then when they get old and have the capacity no longer to serve the machine, they just kick them out. The quicker they're out,